I went to Lincoln Ackerman School, and it was 1 through 6 at that point. And we had Mr. Continus was our principal. 5th and 6th grade was in what was the gym then. Levitt Brown was our janitor, and he took care of anything and everything that ever needed to be done at that school. And if anybody had a scraped knee, you'd see him and he'd, kiss it and make it all better. We'd all feel really good about it. He was such a nice man. But school was a great thing, and I'm thinking in the 3rd grade I had Mrs. Sweeney, and I can still say the 23rd Psalm because that's how we started school every day. It wasn't the Lord's Prayer.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. I hate it when I get that dry cough, too.
Oh, it's just right in the back of my
Yep.
throat. I was trying to swallow it away.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wendy.
It's all right. In fact, I usually carry mints in my video bag because that always happens to be our meetings.
Just give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to start over again.
About going to school?
About going to school?
No, well,
When I was in the 3rd grade, Mrs. Sweeney was our teacher, and we started every day with the 23rd Psalm. So to this day, I can recite the 23rd Psalm because of Mrs. Sweeney. And we did the Lord's Prayer, we did the Pledge of Allegiance every day when you went into school, and that was all part of it. But then that was 1 through 6 was down at Lincoln Ackerman. Then 7th and 8th, I had to go to Hampton Academy. So that part I thought was really good because you go from the little school in Hampton Falls, and then we went to the junior high at Hampton Academy. So we actually got to kind of intermingle with other kids. So when we got to Winnacunnet, which is where we ended up going, we knew a lot of the children, so it wasn't such a culture shock as it was when my daughter ended up going from Lincoln Ackerman of a class of 17 to going to Winnacunnet and class of 300. It was a terrible culture shock. So that part was hard for her, but I thought it was really good as far as what we had, so we could intermingle and get to know the people before we got over there. So Winnacunnet wasn't such a big deal. Of course, the big deal then was going in and buying elevator passes. That was the thing. The upperclassmen would sell you elevator passes. There was no elevator. But that was the big deal then. So it was pretty funny.
When you were growing up, did you and your siblings feel you always wanted to stay in Hampton Falls, or did you ever think about moving someplace larger, or?
I never, when we were growing up, we always talked about being around here, my siblings and I did. They all married, and eventually they ended up moving away, but I was the one that ended up staying in the family home. Because as it was, my husband and I had gotten married. We did live someplace else for a few years, but then my mother got to the point where she could not stay in the house alone. So I always tease that we bought the house and my mother came with it. And she was with us for over 20 years. And I think my children kept her young and kept her going. She passed away at 96. So we kept her going for a long time. There was no question. But it was the others come back. They still come back to home. One of my brothers comes home. He's now 70, and he walks in the door and he acts like he's 12. So that part never changes. It's always going to be home, no matter who lives there. Which one of us lives there, it's always going to be home to them. So my other brother, I have one that's, he's 83 or 82, and he lives in Utah, and he was just back a couple weeks ago, and he's coming back again in a few weeks, so he's very comfortable coming back. So it's nice that happens. So it is home.
So tell us about your work.
My job, when I got out of high school, I ended up going to work for New England Telephone in Exeter as a telephone operator. On the switchboard was 16 positions. And you see the Lily Tomlin jokes, and it was all just like that. And then I ended up going to Salisbury, Massachusetts, to within the phone company. And so I ended up retiring from there after 35 years. Who would have thought it would have lasted that long when I went into it? And it was a lot of different companies because New England Telephone Company could not be, they classified it as not being a monopoly, so they could not have that. So Judge Green set up the process for divestiture. And so it became other companies. So I worked for New England Telephone, AT&T, Bell Atlantic, Verizon, and NYNEX. There was 5 of them involved in this whole thing. So during the course of different times, I worked for all of them. I ended up retiring out of Verizon, and so that's the way that was. My husband ended up working for the Navy Yard. He was sheet metal. He worked for Parman Sicard for many years, and then he was got the job at the Navy Yard, and we had safe jobs. Back then there were safe jobs. You went to work at the telephone company, you were safe. You were not, that was it for your life. If you wanted to stay there, this was your job. If you went to work at the Navy Yard, there was no laying off, there was no letting go, unless you really did something really bad. But there was safe jobs, whereas today, there's no such thing as a safe job. You really have to go in and sell yourself when you go in for any job, and you have to prove that you are the product that this company wants, and you need to continue to prove to yourself. Whereas back then, you did the job, you went home every day, and that was the end of it. And now it's not that at all. It's very competitive. So, like I said, we had safe jobs.
I want to go back to your youth for a moment.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I just want to clarify I think it would be interesting for to talk a little bit more about what it was like to make a phone call when you started working for kids who just have no clue. I remember actually having to get an operator.
Oh yeah, you have ring downs.
So if you could just talk about, when you first started working to make a phone call.
Okay, when I first started working at New England Telephone in Exeter, there were, I think 16 positions. And so everybody that came into work, you had the cords. And when somebody at their house would dial O, it would come into us, a light would come on, we'd have cords, and you'd have to plug into the cord and pick up the call. And then wherever you wanted to call to, we had circuits going out. So we'd have to take the other connecting cord to yours and connect it to wherever you wanted to go, and we'd have to dial the number. And it was a dial, and we'd have pencils with little balls on the end of it so we could dial, and we would connect you through. And you would talk for however long you wanted. When the lights came on, that meant you were done, and we could disconnect the call, and it was all hand done. So when the call started, we had a ticket. We put the number down that you called from, the number down that you called to. We'd have to time it on a little mechanism that we had. When you started the call, we'd have to time it when you stopped the call, and then we would take it down. So all these tickets were counted in the course of an hour. We would have ticket counts. They would have to check. Our supervisor would check us to see if we were keeping up, if we were doing what needed to be done. If it was busy, how many tickets did you take? How many calls did you take? So, and Exeter handled Exeter, Epping, Newmarket, Kingston. I think that's pretty much it. There was only 4 or 5 towns that we handled. So it was very small areas. So then from there was another office in Portsmouth. So they were bigger, so they handled a larger area than we handled. But Phillips Exeter was very busy at that point, so we did a lot. I still remember the phone numbers from then, and that's pretty scary too. So.
Did they have party lines back then?
Absolutely.
Okay, you have to.
We had party lines. There were party lines involved, and there were also ring downs where you would have to call. It was Dover Foxcroft, Maine was one of the ring downs, and you would have to call a specific area. Then you would have to tell the person what number you needed. You needed 4 ring 7, so they would have to set up their system to call that person to get them involved, because they would have to actually almost go get the person to get them to the phone before you could complete the call. So ring downs were very impressive. But to pick up a phone today and call wherever they're calling was absolutely unheard of then. Everything was all hand done.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned growing up that there was a big age difference between you and your siblings, and your father was ill for quite a while. But when you were growing up, did families in Hampton Falls typically take a vacation in the summer, or were they just so involved with farming and maintaining their property that vacations were unheard of, family vacations?
When we were younger, we did not go on vacations because money was an issue, number one. But number two, it was the time of the year that the gardens were all coming in, and we had to work in the yard and work in the garden to get things ready for the fall and for the winter. So you had to take care of the food and preserve and can, and there wasn't a whole lot of freezing at that point. It was basically preserving. So my mother did a lot of that. So yeah, we didn't go on vacations. For us to get to Lynn, Mass, to see her mother was a big deal.
Did you go to the beach?
We did go to the beach, not as much as we would have liked. No, I'm getting that tickle. Excuse me.
I gave it to you.
You did.
My fault.
I get this It's a dry thing too. We would like to have gone to the beach more than we did, but more than anything, we would go down to the depot when the tide was right and go swimming at the depot. No, God. Oh, shoot.
I don't have any water with me.
I don't, oh.
Do we have water?
Yeah, we water.
Shoot. I remember bringing some down, but it was a long time ago,
It
so I
always
didn't know.
happens when you don't want it.
I know it does.
I think if you just finished at the depot, is there anything else that we haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
No, you're
It's
good.
not cold, but
That's okay.
it's
It's
wet.
wet.
I have some of these
Oh.
too. Judy, hold on to these. maybe.
Oh, great, thank
Oh,
you.
yeah.
We
Here we
got
go.
the text.
You've got more talking to do.
Yeah, I'm actually,
I
it
did have a- I
passes.
did have a
It
question
does.
too I wanted
It
to
does
ask
pass.
Gayle.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I just want to finish the going down
Yeah,
to the depot
to the
and
depot.
swimming.
Okay, what we did not, regarding going to the beach when we were younger, we didn't get to the beach that much because number one, it was a ways to go, so we didn't get to go there as often as we'd like. But the big thing was to go down to the depot when the tide was right, and we'd all go swimming at the depot. Fight off the greenheads, but we would go swimming at the depot. And there's one rock, and I'm sure it's still there, that if you dive in at high tide, it's not a good thing to do. So you always had to know where that rock was, because it's right there. So if you just have to know what the different logistics would be, but that's where we were. That's where we ended up spending our time. Between there and myself, would be down at Savage's in the pond, because we all got to learn to swim there.
Did you ride bicycles to get to the depot? How did you get there?
My mother would take us down there, take us down to the depot, because I couldn't get to ride my bike that far. I got to ride my bike to school one day a year, because it was 4 miles from my house down to the school. So I got to ride to school one day a year. Other than that, not so much. We'd have to get a ride with somebody. There was a lady in Exeter, being at my end of town, my siblings we were close enough to the Exeter line, so some went to Exeter and some went to Hampton. My older sisters went to Robinson Seminary in Exeter for school. My sister Beth went to Exeter High School. My brother Don ended up going to Hampton Academy, as my brother Alan went to Hampton Academy. And then my brother Frank, who was the next one in line from me, he started out in Exeter, but then Winnacunnet was built, so he had to swap in his sophomore year to go from Exeter to Hampton. So he was kind of a cross trainer there for a little while. And then I was the only one that ended up going to Winnacunnet for the 4 years. So my brothers and my sisters have reunions, but they're in different places because of the proximity of where we were to the Exeter town line.
When you were growing up, did
Excuse
they
me,
have,
1 second, I'm sorry,
That's all
Marietta. Gail, can I ask you to take a sip of the water and then put it down?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
All right.
when you were growing up, did they have any form of public transportation in town?
There was no public transportation in town. It was your own resources as far as getting anywhere. There was no way to get around. That's why I always felt that I was a little bit isolated at that end of town, because there was really no way to get out of where we were unless we had friends that could come and get us, or something like that. My brother also, at that end of town, there was the Granite State Nursery, which was owned by the Tufts at the end of the road. And my brother worked there. My brother Don worked there for many years in the nursery itself. And my sister Beth ended up babysitting for them for a few summers. So there was always work for some of them that needed to get out and do things, because my sister would go and actually live there for the summer, and Don would work every day there. So there were different things to do, but it was basically all farming kind of attitude is what it was.
When you mentioned that your siblings have all moved away and you have a brother that lives in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
When they come back to visit Hampton Falls, having been away from it for so long, do they have a reaction, or what is their sentiment toward the town? Or
When my siblings come back to visit, they're amazed at the changes that have taken place. There's a lot more houses, there's a lot more people, and all of a sudden they realize they sound like our mother did when all the changes were happening, that we've turned into our parents by saying, look at everything that's changed. But it's just the way the world is now, so there's no way to change that. You just try and go with the flow and make sure that you don't lose what the town has. The charm that has always been part of Hampton Falls, you don't want to lose that. And that's always been the good part. The neighbors are good, the people are good. If there's any issues, people step up, and there's no questions. Just do what you can to help people, and that's what the logistics should be.
Great answer. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Gail, that was terrific.
Okay.
A lot of wonderful information.
Thank you. That
No
was,
problem.
I'm sorry, I apologize for my
Oh,
coughing
well,
fit
no,
to
you gave it to
everybody.
me, so I'm good with this.
You know,
Have you ever heard of any ghost stories in town?
Ooh, there's a good question.
No, I've not.
You haven't?
No, I have not. I
well,
have not.
if you ask Mr. Blaisdell, he says his home is haunted.
Well, yeah, there was always stories about that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, there were stories about it, but I don't know, it would be somebody that lived
That
with
would be a fun video. That people
Yeah, it would,
definitely-
wouldn't it?
Well, can you tell the stories and what you heard?
No, I don't
Or you
remember that. But
remember?
if you could get him, he'd be really interested. It'd be Kim. Have you talked to Kim?
No, is that
Brown?
his wife?
Kim
Oh,
Brown,
oh.
right over here. Sherry and
Okay.
Kim.
Yeah.
Kim grew up in that house.
Really?
Yeah. Kim grew up, she has the flowers right next to Bev.
Yeah.
Bev Mutry, Kim and Sherry Brown. Kim grew up in that house because we went to school all 12 years, well 11 years, because I ended up going to another place for a year. But Kim grew up in that house, so he might be able to tell you some stories.
Mm. How many students in your classes when you were going to Lincoln Ackerman?
Not very many. I can't remember. I know my mother taught at the day school, Exeter Day School, and so I went up there for 1 year. There was 7 in our second grade class, but there was none. Probably 10 or 12, I would say. It was going to a private school in our own little town, and that was the fun part too.
I wonder if George Merrill will have some information
See,
regarding
George
the
grew up-
marshes, the salt marshes.
Yes, George grew up. He was with my older brother Alan, the one that's in Utah, because Alan came back for their 63rd class reunion because he graduated in 1950. So he and George they went to school together, and my sister Carol is also at that same age, but Carol went to Robinson Seminary.
That's
So-
a great idea. I'll
But
ask
with
them
the
about
salt, yeah,
salt
Yes,
marshes.
because
It was
George
critical
was
to
at
the
this end of town.
Right, he was in the salt marsh end.
Exactly. He was at this end of town,
Yeah.
so he would certainly be able to tell you more about that. But I know my mother was talking about that. And I found
Well,
out.
I was doing, we're coming out with a cookbook, and I was doing a little, I'm writing the history, a 2-page synopsis of the
Yeah.
history, and came across the salt marshes and how important it was, and they'd go
Mhm.
down there at 3 a.m.
Mhm.
and collect all of the hay or the straw and make those tufts.
Right.
And as you said,
The
you know, they
haycocks.
packed lunch, yeah, the haycocks, and it was a very social event.
It was
as well as
a
a functional event.
they would have to pack for the day, and everybody would go and work,
Yeah.
but they were down there for the day when they did it. Because I remember her talking about that. But it's interesting. And I used to tell my kids as my mother got older, I said, talk to her, because with every generation we're losing information.
Well, that's why Judy
That's
suggested
why
that
we're
we
doing
talk
this,
with people.
And
exactly.
so just keep talking
Yeah.
to them, and my husband's father lived to be 96 also. And
Wow.
so, I used to tease him because he's Polish. I said, Polacks don't die. We have to take him up behind the barn and shoot him. And he used to laugh. He said, it's pretty true.
Well,
But there was always information that they had that was their way of living that we didn't know anything
You know,
about.
it's kind of funny, my husband was in the hospital and his doctor was in his 30s, and I gave the biography of Harlan Sanders, Kentucky
Mhm.
Fried Chicken, and the doctor didn't realize that Harlan Sanders was an actual person. He thought he was just a mascot or a caricature for Kentucky Fried.
Oh,
So,
really?
yes, so your point that, generations
right.
lose an understanding of what preceded them is
Exactly.
very true.
They just don't understand
no,
at
they
all. No. We just sit back and laugh at some of these things because these
Yeah.
kids come out with such,
I know.
yes, oh, come on, please. So, anyways, well, thank you very much,
Oh,
ladies.
it was great to have you
Thank
join
you
us.
so
So if there's
much.
any more questions, let me know. But
Okay,
another
I
time-
didn't realize the perspective of living where you lived versus living down in
we
Vigo, that it
always
was
felt
like-
that we were at another part. Charlie Burwell, who owned the farm where Silver Oaks is now, Charlie lives in Hampton with his daughter Debbie. Charlie talks about the time the house is split down the middle, okay? Half is in Exeter, half is in Hampton Falls. So the barn also, so they had cows in Exeter and cows in Hampton Falls. When the assessor came from Exeter, they'd move all the cows to Hampton Falls.
That's so cute.
When the assessor came from Hampton Falls, they'd move all the cows to Exeter.
Can we just get that?
So-
That's really a good story.
So
Are
it
you
was.
still,
can
are
we-
you
can we-
still,
yeah.
you're still?
You're still
Oh,
taping?
Except you guys were going, oh.
I know.
Oh,
Okay,
I
so
thought we were
back,
over, so we were
want to
just-
rephrase that, or you can edit it out, you can fix
No,
that?
say it
We have to-
Okay.
we have to-
When we were so close to the Burwell farm, and the Burwell farm is next door to where I live, and the house is split down the middle. So half of the house is in Exeter, half of the house is in Hampton Falls. So the barn was also split. So when the Exeter assessor would come to value the cows that the Burwells owned, they would move all the cows to the Hampton Falls side. And then when the Hampton Falls assessor, so Exeter would say that there's no cows. Then the Hampton Falls assessor would come, they'd move all the cows over to the Exeter side, so Hampton Falls would say, there's no cows. Well, they finally caught on after many years, and I think they ended up splitting it down the middle. But it was really interesting for them to live in that house and have it actually divided down the middle. So the Burwell, Vera and Charlie and the girls lived in one half, and then his parents lived in the other half. So one was in Exeter and one was in Hampton, but they're in the same, Hampton Falls rather, and they're in the same house.